They said his career was over more times than anyone can count, yet Johnny Depp kept moving in directions no one predicted. From being the quiet heartthrob of teen magazines to choosing strange, risky roles that confused Hollywood, his journey never followed the safe path. Fame gave him power, but it also put him under a microscope where every choice felt amplified. Studios doubted him, critics questioned him, and audiences wondered if he would ever return to the spotlight the same way. What makes his story gripping is not the rise, but the unexpected turns that reshaped everything people thought they knew about him. From the very beginning, Johnny Depp never looked like someone built for a predictable Hollywood career. He entered the industry at a time when studios were searching for clean, reliable faces that could be marketed easily. When he appeared on television in the late 1980s, audiences quickly labeled him as a teen idol. That label brought attention, money, and fame, but it also came with a quiet trap. Instead of seeing him as an actor with range, many executives saw him as a product meant to stay frozen in one image. Depp himself later explained in interviews with Rolling Stone that this period felt uncomfortable, almost claustrophobic, because people were reacting more to his face than to his work. He has said that the attention made him restless, and that restlessness would soon push him toward choices no one expected. Rather than protecting his popularity, he began rejecting offers that could have kept him safely on television. This decision confused people around him, including agents and producers who believed he was walking away from easy success. Depp has openly stated in multiple interviews that he did not want to repeat himself or feel like he was lying to himself for a paycheck. This mindset led him toward independent films and unusual characters, choices that carried risk at a time when one wrong move could permanently damage a career. His collaboration with director Tim Burton became a defining example of this risk-taking. Films like Edward Scissorhands presented him as quiet, awkward, and emotionally vulnerable, the opposite of the confident heartthrob image audiences were used to. Critics were unsure how to react at first, but over time, these performances began to shift how he was viewed within the industry. What made this phase of his career unexpected was not just the roles themselves, but the consistency of his choices. Instead of alternating between safe commercial projects and artistic films, Depp leaned heavily into characters that challenged mainstream taste. He played outsiders, misfits, and emotionally damaged figures, often in stories that prioritized mood over spectacle. According to interviews he gave to The Guardian, he felt more connected to characters who existed on the edges of society. This connection resonated with a certain segment of the audience but alienated others who wanted him to remain familiar and comfortable. Box office numbers fluctuated, and there were moments when his career seemed unstable, yet he continued down the same path. Then came a turn that surprised almost everyone. When he accepted the role of Captain Jack Sparrow, many assumed it was another strange gamble. Early reports later confirmed by producers indicated that studio executives were concerned by his performance choices. They reportedly felt his portrayal was too odd, too unpredictable, and possibly damaging to the film's success. Depp has discussed in interviews with Entertainment Weekly how he deliberately avoided playing the character in a traditional heroic way. Instead, he drew inspiration from unexpected sources, shaping Jack Sparrow into someone humorous, unpredictable, and morally ambiguous. This choice, once criticized internally, became the very reason the character stood out. The success of that role changed his career overnight. Suddenly, the same unpredictability that once worried studios became his greatest asset. He was no longer just an actor taking risks. He was a bankable star whose unusual instincts seemed to work. However, this success created a new challenge. Audiences began associating him strongly with one iconic character, and expectations shifted again. Instead of questioning whether he could succeed, people began questioning whether he could escape that image. Depp himself has acknowledged in later interviews that this period felt like being placed into a new kind of box, one shaped by massive global popularity rather than niche artistry. As the years went on, his film choices became increasingly scrutinized. Some projects succeeded, while others struggled critically or financially. Media narratives began forming around the idea that his career was becoming inconsistent. Reports surfaced about behind-the-scenes tensions, production delays, and creative disagreements. While not all of these stories were confirmed, they contributed to a growing perception that working with him involved risk. Depp addressed some of these concerns in interviews by emphasizing his focus on character rather than commercial outcome. He explained that he was less interested in numbers and more invested in whether a role allowed him to explore something new. This attitude, while artistically admirable, placed him at odds with an industry driven by predictability and profit. Studios began to hesitate, and roles that once might have gone directly to him were offered elsewhere. Critics debated whether his unconventional approach had finally caught up with him. At the same time, fans remained deeply loyal, often defending his choices and celebrating his willingness to avoid formulaic performances. This divide between critical opinion and audience support became a defining feature of this stage in his career. Another unexpected turn came when public attention shifted away from his work and toward his personal life. Media coverage intensified, often overshadowing his professional achievements. Depp has stated in court testimonies and interviews that this period felt invasive and deeply personal, impacting not only his reputation but also his ability to secure roles. Regardless of where opinions landed, the result was clear. His career trajectory was being influenced by factors far beyond the screen. Projects were delayed, cancelled, or recast, reinforcing the narrative that his time in Hollywood was fading. Yet even during this period, he did not disappear. Instead, he focused on projects outside the traditional studio system, including independent films and international collaborations. He also returned to music, touring and recording with fellow musicians, an interest he had maintained long before fame. In interviews with French media outlets, he described these creative outlets as grounding, a way to reconnect with himself away from constant judgment. These choices reflected a shift in priorities, suggesting that success, for him, no longer meant dominance at the box office. What makes this phase of his career particularly unexpected is how quietly it unfolded. There was no dramatic announcement, no clear declaration of reinvention. Instead, his path simply diverged from mainstream expectations. While some interpreted this as decline, others saw it as evolution. Depp himself has said that he never measured his career by awards or headlines, but by whether he felt honest in his work. This perspective challenges traditional definitions of success and reframes the conversation around longevity and fulfillment. Industry analysts have noted that his career serves as a case study in how fame can both elevate and restrict an artist. The same qualities that made him stand out early on later became reasons for caution among decision makers. Yet those qualities also ensured that he never became invisible. Even during quieter periods, discussions about his past performances and potential future roles continued. Interviews and retrospectives frequently revisit his earlier work, highlighting how his willingness to take risks shaped modern character-driven cinema. As Part 1 comes to a close, the question is no longer whether his career followed a straight line, because it clearly did not. The real question is how these unexpected turns reshaped not only his public image but also the industry's understanding of what a leading actor can be. His journey challenges the idea that success must look the same at every stage, setting the stage for what happened next, when the narrative around him began to shift once again in ways few could have predicted. That shift did not come with applause or celebration. Instead, it arrived quietly, through absence. Fewer major studio announcements carried his name, fewer red carpet appearances followed, and the conversation around his career began to sound like a postmortem rather than an ongoing story. Commentators spoke as if the ending had already been written. Yet behind the scenes, something else was happening. He was reassessing what acting meant to him after decades under constant scrutiny. In recorded testimony and later interviews, he explained that when the noise becomes louder than the work, an artist has two options: chase approval or return to purpose. He chose the second. During this period, his approach to creativity became more selective. Rather than seeking roles that would correct public perception, he gravitated towards stories that felt personal or meaningful. These were not projects designed to dominate headlines, but ones that allowed him to exist outside the cycle of judgment. Some were foreign productions, others were character-driven films with limited releases. While these choices rarely generated mainstream buzz, they reflected a clear pattern. He was no longer trying to prove relevance to an industry that had already made up its mind. This withdrawal from the spotlight was often misinterpreted as retreat. However, people who worked closely with him during this time described a different reality. Cinematographers and directors, quoted in trade publications, spoke about his preparation, discipline, and attention to detail. They noted that despite public narratives, his commitment on set remained intense. These accounts complicate the simplified version of decline often presented in headlines. They suggest that while his visibility decreased, his engagement with the craft did not. The turning point came when legal proceedings brought his name back into global conversation. This time, the focus was not on box office numbers or creative choices, but on credibility and character. Court transcripts and recorded statements introduced the public to a version of events that felt raw and unfiltered. Regardless of opinion, the proceedings had a measurable impact on how people perceived him. Public interest surged, not because of a new film release, but because audiences were reassessing a story they thought they understood. What followed was unexpected. Rather than fading further, his cultural relevance intensified. Online platforms filled with discussions dissecting old interviews, past performances, and long-standing media narratives. Fans revisited earlier work with fresh perspective, while critics debated whether the industry had been too quick to distance itself. This renewed attention did not immediately translate into traditional offers, but it reopened doors that had quietly closed. More importantly, it shifted the tone of the conversation from finality to possibility. He addressed this moment cautiously. In post-trial interviews, he emphasized that vindication was never about restoring a career, but about reclaiming personal truth. He stated on record that no role, award, or contract could compensate for losing one's voice. This framing resonated with many who had followed his journey over the years. It reframed his career not as a series of wins and losses, but as a prolonged negotiation between identity and expectation. Gradually, signs of professional re-entry appeared. Announcements surfaced about new projects, collaborations, and creative ventures. These were not blockbuster franchises designed to dominate summer schedules. Instead, they reflected the same pattern seen earlier in his career: unconventional choices driven by curiosity rather than calculation. Industry insiders noted that while studios remained cautious, there was renewed interest in his ability to bring depth and unpredictability to complex characters. His return to public events further complicated the narrative. Appearances at international festivals were met with extended applause, signaling that audience sentiment had shifted. These moments were widely documented and analyzed, often framed as redemption arcs. Yet he resisted that language, stating in interviews that he never left acting, nor did he return as a different person. From his perspective, the only change was that the world had finally slowed down enough to listen. This phase highlighted a broader issue within entertainment culture: how quickly perception can override reality. His career became a reference point in discussions about media responsibility, public judgment, and the long-term effects of controversy on creative professionals. Scholars and commentators cited his experience when examining how narratives are constructed and reinforced. Whether praised or criticized, his journey became instructional, revealing how fragile reputations can be in the digital age. Financially and professionally, the consequences of earlier distancing did not disappear overnight. Rebuilding trust within an industry driven by risk assessment takes time. Yet his willingness to continue working without guarantees demonstrated a consistency that had defined him from the beginning. He was once again choosing uncertainty over comfort, a pattern that had both elevated and challenged him throughout his life. As newer audiences discovered his work through streaming platforms, another shift occurred. Younger viewers, removed from the original media cycles, engaged with his performances without inherited bias. To them, he was not a fallen star or a returning figure, but an actor with a distinct presence and range. This generational reset offered something rare: a chance for his work to speak before the narrative did. Looking back, it becomes clear that the most unexpected turns in his career were not the sudden rises or visible setbacks, but the quiet decisions made when no one was watching. Choices to step away, to speak openly, to continue creating without applause. These moments lack spectacle, yet they define the arc more than any premiere or headline. They reveal a career shaped less by strategy and more by resistance to being simplified. By the time this chapter settles, the idea of a single trajectory no longer applies. His career cannot be summarized as success followed by failure, or fall followed by comeback. It exists as a series of movements, each responding to pressure in different ways. Some were misunderstood, others were celebrated, but all contributed to a body of work and a public story that remains unresolved. And perhaps that is the most honest ending possible. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. Not a verdict, but an open question. Because careers built on unpredictability rarely end cleanly. They linger, evolve, and resurface in forms no one anticipates, leaving the audience to reconsider what it truly means when they say someone's career took turns no one expected. If this journey made you rethink how fame, failure, and resilience really work, then don't stop here. Stories like this matter because they reveal what headlines leave out. If you value honest breakdowns of real careers, real choices, and real consequences, stay connected. Your support tells us which stories deserve deeper exploration and which voices deserve to be heard beyond noise and judgment. Share your thoughts, stay curious, and keep questioning the narratives you're given, because the most important turns are often the ones no one talks about. As the years continue to pass, Johnny Depp stands in a space few actors ever reach, a place where legacy is still being written while the world watches in real time. What separates this phase of his life from earlier chapters is not visibility, but intention. There is no rush to reclaim a throne, no urgency to dominate headlines. Instead, there is a measured pace, one shaped by experience rather than expectation. This alone marks another unexpected turn, because Hollywood rarely rewards patience, and almost never forgives those who step out of line. People often misunderstand longevity. They assume it means staying constantly relevant, always present, always trending. But longevity can also mean endurance, surviving eras that were never designed to be fair. Depp's career illustrates this in a way that feels almost uncomfortable to acknowledge. He outlasted trends that favored uniform heroes. He resisted systems that demanded predictability. And when consequences followed, he absorbed them rather than reshaping himself to fit what was easier. Interviews from the past decade repeatedly show him returning to the same idea, that he never believed he belonged to the industry in the first place. This belief, strange as it sounds, may be exactly what allowed him to survive it. There is a quiet irony in how his work is now being reevaluated. Films once dismissed as odd or indulgent are being revisited with new respect. Critics who once questioned his choices now frame those same performances as influential. This shift is not driven by public relations campaigns, but by time. Distance allows context, and context allows honesty. Younger filmmakers cite his earlier roles as inspiration, not because they were flawless, but because they were fearless. This delayed appreciation highlights how unconventional paths often make sense only after the fact. His relationship with fame has also visibly changed. Earlier in his career, fame seemed like something he tolerated rather than embraced. Later, it became something he actively avoided. Recent appearances suggest a man no longer negotiating with public approval. When asked about future plans in international interviews, he speaks less about ambition and more about curiosity. The difference matters. Ambition seeks validation, curiosity seeks experience. This shift reframes everything that comes next, because it removes the pressure to win back anything that was lost. Financial analysts and industry commentators still debate his market value, often reducing decades of work to risk assessments and projections. Yet this perspective misses a crucial point. His influence no longer operates solely within box office numbers. It exists in cultural memory, in the way audiences respond to characters that feel unpolished and human. His performances are studied not for technical perfection, but for emotional texture. That kind of influence does not disappear simply because fewer studio logos appear before his name. Another overlooked aspect of his journey is how openly it exposes the limits of celebrity culture. His career forces uncomfortable questions. How much control does an artist truly have over their narrative? How quickly does public opinion solidify into assumed truth? How often does the industry protect itself at the expense of individuals? These questions linger precisely because his story never resolved neatly. There was no single scandal, no simple lesson, no universally accepted conclusion. Instead, there was accumulation of choices, reactions, and consequences layered over time. His willingness to continue creating despite uncertainty sends a message rarely acknowledged. Success does not always mean restoration. Sometimes it means continuation on different terms. He did not rebuild by apologizing for who he was, nor by reinventing himself to appear safer. He rebuilt by remaining consistent, even when consistency came at a cost. This approach contradicts most recovery narratives, which rely on visible transformation. His transformation was internal, subtle, and therefore easy to miss. The audience's role in this evolution cannot be ignored. Public perception shifted not because it was instructed to, but because it witnessed contradiction. Stories that once seemed settled began to unravel under scrutiny. Archived interviews resurfaced. Old statements were re-examined. Patterns became visible. This organic reassessment demonstrates how collective understanding can change when people stop consuming narratives passively. In that sense, his career became less about acting and more about participation, a shared process between artist and audience. There is also a deeper emotional layer to his later work. Performances from recent years carry a weight that feels earned rather than performed. Lines are delivered with restraint. Expressions linger longer. Silence is allowed to exist. These qualities suggest an actor less interested in commanding attention and more interested in presence. For viewers paying close attention, This evolution is compelling. It reflects someone who has lived through scrutiny and emerged less reactive, more grounded. Some critics argue that his best years are behind him. Others claim they are yet to come. Both positions assume a linear model of value that no longer applies. His career resists timelines. It loops, pauses, detours, and resumes. Each phase informs the next without erasing what came before. This nonlinear progression mirrors real life more closely than traditional success stories ever could. Perhaps that is why his journey resonates so strongly with people who have experienced public or private judgment. International recognition has played a significant role in sustaining this later chapter. While mainstream American studios hesitated, global audiences remained receptive. Film festivals abroad welcomed his work without the baggage dominating domestic discourse. This contrast reveals how cultural distance can create space for nuance. Outside the echo chamber of local media cycles, his work was evaluated more on content than controversy. This acceptance reinforced the idea that careers do not belong to a single market or narrative. Music has also remained a constant thread. Long before acting, he identified as a musician, and returning to that identity offered stability when film opportunities fluctuated. Touring, recording, and collaborating allowed him to exist creatively without expectation of judgment tied to box office performance. This parallel career is often treated as a side note, yet it provided something crucial: continuity. It ensured that creativity never depended on external permission. What emerges from examining this entire arc is not a cautionary tale, but a complicated one. It warns against equating visibility with value. It challenges the assumption that careers must peak once and then fade. It exposes how quickly institutions distance themselves when risk appears, and how slowly they reconsider. Most importantly, it demonstrates that authenticity, while costly, leaves a longer imprint than compliance ever could. As time moves forward, the question surrounding his career continues to evolve. It is no longer about redemption or comeback. It is about relevance on his own terms. Relevance defined not by volume, but by meaning. Whether future projects achieve commercial success is almost secondary now. Their existence alone confirms that the story was never finished, only misunderstood. In the end, the most unexpected turn may be this: that after decades of fame, criticism, and survival, the defining feature of his career is not scandal or spectacle, but persistence. Not persistence fueled by ambition, but persistence grounded in identity. He kept going not to prove anyone wrong, but because stopping would have meant surrendering the very thing that made him who he was. And so the journey continues, quietly, deliberately, without guarantees. A career that refused to follow the script written for it, choosing instead to unfold in fragments, contradictions, and moments of clarity. That is what makes it impossible to summarize in a single sentence. That is what makes it real. If this story changed how you see careers, fame, and second chances, don't let the conversation end here. Engage with the content that goes deeper than headlines and surface-level judgment. Your interaction decides which stories continue to be told with honesty instead of noise. Support thoughtful storytelling, share perspectives that add value, and stay curious about the truth behind public narratives. When audiences demand depth, creators are forced to deliver it. Keep questioning, keep watching closely, and stay part of discussions that actually matter.